If we dump some sugar on her.
Okay, let's go.
No, let's not go. Well,
We have to do more than normal.
No. What if we miss school tomorrow? Then you're gonna be really.
That's based partly on
What we're doing
a
today.
possibility that we're going to be snowed out tomorrow. So,
Well, let's
okay.
cruise.
So
Oh my gosh, I can't smell. I'm sorry.
I am now showing you evidence that you might consider using if you are writing a Blue Book essay on how it is that the United States became an international juggernaut.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the argument would be the belief that Americans were somehow superior as a nation, as a race, as a people, and that's based on what I'm about to show you. So this could be historical evidence.
What kind
It is also possibly historical evidence for those of you writing the nativist essay, because if you want to limit immigration, it's based on a belief that you're better than fill in the blank. Where'd that idea come from? In part based on what I'm about to show you. What I'm telling you is that this is useful for either Blue Book essay. And remember, you're writing a Blue Book essay and you're writing a paper. Don't get them mixed up. Don't get them mixed up. We are looking at basically the theory of evolution, the belief that current species evolved based on physical characteristics while the beings of inferior characteristics die off. So the long-clawed lizard survives the water flooding. The short-clawed lizard dies off. Long-clawed lizard, Mrs. Long-clawed lizard, they have long-clawed lizard children, and the species evolves. That idea. The bear that had white fur lives because he lives in the polar areas. The brown-haired bear is hunted. White bear meets Mrs. White Bear. They have white bear children, and the species evolves. To the victor go the spoils. But think about it. You can apply that to animals. You can apply that to race. The superior race survives. The inferior race is wiped out. That's what Hitler said. You can apply it to businesses. The superior business thrives. The inferior business is bought out. That's what Rockefeller did. But wait, you can apply it to nations. The superior nation conquers the inferior nation. It's what justified American westward expansion. Okay, it's all based on this idea of Darwin, who went to the Galapagos Islands and studied animals that had certain characteristics, and it led to this belief called social Darwinism. Take the ideas of evolution in the natural world and apply it to businesses, nations, races. Did you hear those three things? Businesses, races, and nations. Take the idea of the superior entity survives, the inferior entity dies off. It's the justification for what Hitler did. It's the justification for American westward expansion. It's the justification for what Rockefeller did. We're better than you. It's how Globo Jim tried to buy off average Joes.
Good analogy.
Thank you. Question?
Got it.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Let's keep going. Let's meet two thinkers, both African American, who disagreed with each other as far as civil rights are concerned. This does tie into the discussion that we just had about the superior race. If African Americans are inferior, then they deserve to be second-class citizens. That idea of social Darwinism is taken on by two giants. That's Booker T. Washington, and this is W.E.B. Du Bois. So Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois. There's Booker T. standing with his philanthropist friends. That's Andrew Carnegie, right? The steel magnate. I'm not sure who these other people are, but they are philanthropists. What does that mean? Right, they help out financially, right? So Booker T met with these people who had lots of money, and he said, here's my idea. He proposed his idea, and they gave him a ton of money, and then he started his idea, which I haven't told you yet. Yes?
It's like Shark Tank.
Yes, it's like Shark Tank. You're exactly right. It's like Shark Tank. So the question is, before these two was, hey, what about equal rights for African Americans? And they disagreed. They both agreed that it should be done. The methodology is what they disagreed with. Booker T said, look, having the right to vote and having the right to free speech is pointless if African Americans can't afford a house, don't have a job. We got no food. We got no jobs. Our pets' heads are falling off. So this guy's saying, look, we'll eventually get there. This is important. Understand this. We're going to get there. Eventually. Now. There's the difference. There's the difference. Booker T says, look, let's educate African Americans. Let's get them to learn to read and to write. And then they can start their own businesses. They can be successful economically, which will lead to equality politically. But the economics first. W.E.B. Du Bois totally disagreed with that. Now. And as a result, we need government. We need the federal government to step in now. So Mr. Du Bois wants political, social, and economic equality now. They both had an impact. Any of you ever heard of the Tuskegee Airmen? Who were they? They were, yes, black pilots. Okay, they were the African American pilots who flew and bombed Japan. The Tuskegee Airmen. There's a movie about that. Redbirds. Yes, Redbirds. I've never seen it. I guess it's okay. The Tuskegee Institute started by Booker T. Washington. Today we call it Georgia Tech. It's the school, Georgia Tech. Was not called Georgia Tech, right? Educate them, give them skills, computer hacking skills, nunchuck skills. Then go out, get a job, get a nice house, start your own business. Then acquire political equality. Then demand the end of Jim Crow. This guy also had an impact. He formed something that still exists today, the NAACP. Anyone ever heard of it? What is it? What does NAACP stand for? In my opinion, I could be wrong here, but I think it is the only acceptable context where you can say what CP stands for today and not be looked at without cringing. Colored people is correct with the CP, right? You don't. I don't stand here and talk about the coloreds or the Negroes, right? Those terms are simply just not in vogue today, whereas decades ago, 100 years ago, they were. Very similar, by the way, to anyone following what's going on in Virginia. Oh my goodness, what a mess. The state of Virginia, the governor of Virginia, somebody found a picture of him in 1984. So, I mean, that's decades ago. 1984, when he was a young med student in what we call blackface. Does anyone know what that means? Mm-hmm. Right? He took shoe polish and colored his skin and went to a party, and he was hilarious. And this was in 1984, and you just don't do it. Did anyone see SNL last Saturday? Thank you for saying no. But did any of you see SNL? They had a skit where they had all these white people asking, "Well, what's wrong with doing that?" And one girl raised her hand. What if you're half black, right? Half black. And the moderator said, "Oh, well, I mean, that means it's part of your race, and so it might be okay." And the girl said, "No, you don't understand. I painted half my face black, Michael Jackson before and Michael Jackson after."
Oh my God.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Okay? Blackface. It's just simply not something to be done. My point here is this: the term colored people. Don't say that. Don't say, and the Negroes. No, don't. Stop it. Okay? Terms fall out of vogue. I mean, wait till we get to what they used to call Japanese. Jeez. Yes.
So then why are they making, why nowadays are they like making such a fuss about that when there's like a movie like Chicks and they basically do the reverse? And that's like completely acceptable.
Because there's a difference between politicians and actors. Okay. In the middle is person number 3. His name is George Washington Carver. Anyone ever heard of him? What do you do? Come on. The peanut guy. All right, very good. Everyone knows him. He invented peanut butter. Take that back. Very good. And person number 4 is a guy by the name of Marcus Garvey. Very interesting argument. I've said this before, but in this class, we're gonna try and wrestle with how the attempted integration of Native Americans was seen as the wrong thing to do. So segregation was the right thing to do, but segregation with African Americans was the wrong thing to do. So integration was the right thing to do. And why? What's going on there? Marcus Garvey accepted the idea of segregation, and he started something called the Back to Africa movement. Back to Africa, I think they ended up buying a boat and attempting to sail to Africa, the land of our ancestors. So that's another position. Economic first, then eventually political. We want it all now. And then position number 3, which was segregation. We think it's the right thing to do. Minority. Okay. Any questions there? We got to put her in gear here, so let's keep going.
They're not good.
This is part of the argument for those of you writing the essay, Blue Book essay on why is it that the United States became an economic juggernaut? How'd that happen? And part of the argument was our second to none education system. And I am not talking about high school. I am talking about our college education system. This is true today. Students from all over come to the U.S. to study. Students from China come to the U.S. because our college education system is acknowledged to be the best. And then they come here, study, and then they go back to their home country and do whatever accomplish. You're actually looking at a picture that was taken about 30 miles from here. It's still there. This fence is still there. It's in the Highland Park area. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Minneapolis? Okay. The United States federal government in 1862 passed what's called the Morrill Act, which set aside land in each state for public universities. You are looking at the beginning of the University of Minnesota. There it is. It was originally a school to learn how to farm. Definitely. They still have an agricultural department. Absolutely. So does River Falls. River Falls known as Moo U. At least it used to be. Anyway. Generally, each state has one, what they call land grant university. Usually it's when the state has the word state after it. Usually, not always, but so Michigan State University, that's the land grant university. It's the one that received public funding from the federal government. Now, there is no Wisconsin State, but Madison is the one in Wisconsin. Minnesota is the one in Minnesota. Indiana State, that's a thing. Mississippi State.
Oregon State.
Sorry? North Dakota State, Florida State, you got it. Okay. Now, you might say, hey, wait a minute, there is two of Minnesota State. Minnesota State, Mankato. And you're right. But they changed their name about 10 years ago from Mankato State. Just to make students think that it was a bigger school. Exactly. Okay. And then a second law here. The federal government passed what's called the Hatch Act, which said, hey, let's teach farmers how to farm. Now, I'm going to ask us to synthesize here, actually contextualize, because this is interesting, because aggressive farming starting in 1880s led to quite possibly the over-farming of the American heartland, which led to the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl. Yes, you want an excellent example of where humans do affect the environment, the Dust Bowl of the Great Depression, caused by over-aggressive farming. Now, that's a story for another day, but kind of interesting. My point here is this. This is friendly government. This is friendly government behavior, which leads to the economic growth that the United States experienced. That is one of the options for Blue Book essay. Essay number one, right? How did we become such an economic giant? Well, one of the arguments is government policy. Friendly government policy. Here's two examples. Ready? Some of us are being silly today. Okay. I am now showing you evidence for your paper. Before I continue, I am now going to acknowledge. God, there's a lot. Okay, there's me patting you on the back. Part of the argument. Part of your paper is deciding whether or not the United States was justified in getting involved in the Spanish-American War. That is, right? The documents that you were assigned last week that are supposed to be ready by Wednesday, half of them argue the yes. I am now providing you some evidence to back up some of those arguments. Okay? We appear to be looking at two children, although their faces reveal them to be quite a bit older, and they're playing with cool blocks, and it spells out that fun word, war. Well, of course, as you know, all three. No, they did. All three of these are backwards, but of course, A and W are reversible. You are looking at printing blocks.
Oh, I see.
Take the R, stamp it on a piece of paper. That R is no longer backwards. As you know, or as you should know, when Gutenberg invented the printing press, they made all the letters backwards. So that when they put the paper on, first they slabbered it with ink, then they put the paper on it, pressed it, the letter would be not backwards anymore, right? This is very clever. This is a political cartoon showing backwards letters, which indicates to you that this involves the newspaper industry, because newspapers were the ones that made the letters backwards so that when they pressed it on the paper, it would not be backwards. You following me? Okay. These two are newspaper people. One of them is named William Randolph Hearst, and the other one is a guy by the name of Pulitzer. Anyone ever heard of Pulitzer? Does that name ring a bell? Why?
Isn't it a newspaper?
It's the Pulitzer Prize. Exactly. Named after this guy. The Pulitzer Prize goes to newspaper articles for best written stuff every year. Later on, when we get to Watergate, we'll study the winner of the Pulitzer is the two newspaper writers who revealed Nixon in Watergate. But that's now. At the time, I wouldn't call these two the most responsible newspaper writers ever. Let me ask this: Why does media print sensational stories today? Why do they print that Elvis was spotted on
Money.
the moon? Can you expound on that a little bit? She said money. What do you mean?
Everything revolves around money.
Yes, but how does me typing Elvis spotted on the moon? Do I get a check in the mail?
People will read it.
And attention on your article gives you more money.
Very good, right? People see the title, then they buy the newspaper. You sell more newspapers. Sensationalism. It's what our current president argues is called fake news. That the media just makes up stuff to sell newspapers or today online advertisements. And we can debate later on whether it's really fake news or it's just what he says is fake news, so you don't believe what the newspapers are claiming are legit stories. But what I'm here telling you is that this is nothing new. That this competition between these two to sell more newspapers led to them printing increasingly amazing stories to sell newspapers. They were, in some cases, just making stuff up. And part of what they made up was what was happening in Cuba, which led to the American military, the United States government declaring war against Spain. So they made up stuff, exaggerated stuff to sell newspapers. That is called yellow journalism. Yellow journalism is when
Fake
media makes stuff up to sell more of their product. Newspaper A says, well, the Spanish are doing this to the Cuban people, so newspaper B has to match it with something even more. And the American public eats it up. They believe it. Why wouldn't they believe it? It's in the newspaper. It's just like today, right? Why wouldn't you believe what's on TV? It's on the TV. The TV doesn't lie. It never lies, right? The incredible power of media on the U.S. that perhaps, this is kind of a big idea here we go, perhaps media led to the U.S. getting involved in the Spanish-American War based on exaggeration, which would certainly be an argument for why the U.S. should not have been involved. That the U.S. made a decision based on exaggerations from two competing newspapers. Okay? There are other examples of media having a huge impact on U.S. government policy. A guy by the name of Henry George wrote a book called Progress and Poverty, basically arguing that, yes, there are these few wealthy Americans, but there's a whole lot of poor people. Let's just think about this. Let's create a country of 2 people total. A country called it's called Billville, right? Billville has 2 people in it, completely total, 2 people. One makes $10 billion. $10 billion. The other one makes $10.
Bill.
10 billion. 10. What is the average income of the people of Billville?
Almost 10 billion. Almost
No.
5 billion.
5 billion. 5. The average income of the people of Billville is $5 billion and $5. Yes? Well, those people are well off, aren't they?
No.
But the average income is over $5 billion. Right? It's the magic of numbers, how numbers can deceive.
But if you put another $10 person in there, it's already down to $2.5 billion.
That's okay.
So-
You're making 2.5
So
billion.
hold up. you're saying that the small group of the rich is distorting the big group of poor, right?
Yeah.
But if the poor group is big enough, then the average will still be low.
It'll be low, but not low enough so that the consumer of this media concludes that they're bad off. It's disproportionately higher than it should be. What you need to do is create population groups, which is fair. Hey, this is a big idea that we're going to address, and that is this: the role of the media at this time. Again, think about this. There are problems. There are problems. Who reveals the problems? Media. Media is the mirror holder. Look at yourself. And the American public looks at themselves, doesn't like what it sees, and then says, all right, federal government, fix it. Whatever it is. Let's solve the problems. But it is media that holds the mirror. Questions? Let's keep going. Only a couple more. I have told you that media is the mirror holder. Problem: alcohol. That's the problem. The media reveals the immigration of Germans and Irish, and Germans and Irish drink. So we're going to restrict immigration. Yeah. We're going to outlaw alcohol. Why outlaw alcohol? To prevent the immigration of Irish and German. That's part of the idea. Okay. The right to vote. It is not a coincidence that the right to vote happens when it happened. Right around the year 1900, right? At the same time that the U.S. population is looking at itself in the mirror and saying, wow, there are a lot of problems. A lot of poverty. Immigration's a problem. Big business is a problem. Solution is let's get women the right to vote, because women are the moral compass. We men, we can't help it. We drink and we smoke and we go to bars and we get prostitutes, and we can't help it. It's in our DNA. It's really not even our fault. That's why we need you women to raise the children. You need to raise the boys to be good boys. I can't do it. I'm a dad. I'll raise them to be awful. But you'll raise them to be good. Now let's just think that through. If your role, women, is to raise proper children, so you are the moral compass in your family, why not take that idea and apply it to the nation? If you raise proper kids, then why don't you raise a proper nation through the vote and eventually running for office? You'll do the right thing. So they have what's called the National Women's Suffrage Association. Suffrage means right to vote. Means right to vote.
How do you feel about women's suffrage? Oh, women's suffrage is terrible.
Oh yeah, those
Suffrage, yeah. Does anyone happen to know what year?
That to my dad. He's
What
like,
year?
Women, they suffer. They
Women
go through so
gain the right to
much.
vote
They
based on
work
a
so
constitutional
hard,
amendment.
They don't need this.
And which amendment?
The 18th, 17th, 19th, 21st.
It's in there.
It's in 21 Pro. From 18 to 21st, it was in one of those.
You are correct.
Yes.
Yes. 19th Amendment. It is the 19th Amendment, 1920. The 19th Amendment passed in 1920. Since 1920, sisters unite. Oh, Lord. But look at some of the other amendments. The 18th Amendment outlaws the manufacture, distribution, and sale of alcohol. See, there's a problem. Let's fix it. Let's amend the Constitution of the United States so that it is a permanent fix. Let's give women the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. There was an amendment right in there. It's 20th Amendment. Nope, 16th Amendment, the direct election of senators. See, there's a problem. Let's fix it. Let's fix the problem. Now, you might look at this note here and say, that's hypocritical. That if women see, hey, it's not fair to allow us the right to vote, so you should give us the right to vote. Then why didn't those same people who demanded women have the right to vote say, yeah, that's not fair what you're doing to blacks? They should have the right to vote. And before you say, they did have the right to vote, 15th Amendment. Yeah, but remember, poll tax, literacy test, grandfather clause were still the thing. Why didn't the same people who demanded women gain the right to vote also say, yeah, so should African Americans? And I'm here to tell you it's because all of us do this. This is human nature. We are able to differentiate the we from the you. We think we should have the right to vote, but them, well, but they're black. Right? It's different. It's the same thing the Japanese would do to the Chinese. It's the same thing that United States would do to Native Americans. It's the same thing that Hitler would do to the Slavs and the Jews, the demonization of the other. Anyone who was an Aryan, right, is demonized. Let's keep going here. Kind of a cool political cartoon. The saloon is the bad thing, right? The saloons are where you drank. And we're going to chop down alcohol because alcohol leads to a corrupt society. So we have the creation of something called the National Prohibition Party, something called the Anti-Saloon League, and ultimately its crowning achievement, the amending of the U.S. Constitution. There's a problem in society, let's fix it. Anyone know what root beer was invented? 1919. Root beer. I mean, all these huge breweries suddenly cannot make beer. Well, then let's make root beer. 1919. The year alcohol became illegal is the year root beer became a thing. The 1919 root beer. It's called 1919 root beer because that's when it started. Now, allow me to pose this idea to you, and it shouldn't really be a surprise. They made the manufacture, distribution, and sale of alcohol illegal. By the way, notice they did not make the consumption of alcohol illegal. You can't make it, sell it, or buy it, but go ahead and drink it. Anyone understand? Anyone understand the logic?
Yeah.
You already
You already had it, right? We're not going to come take away your wine cellar, right? But eventually that's going to disappear was the logic here, okay? And also notice that this time period is also the time period of gangsters and organized crime. That is not a coincidence.
Bootleggers.
Yeah, bootlegging. Absolutely. In fact, you happen to be in the storage area for the Twin Cities alcohol consumption during Prohibition. Somerset, Wisconsin. Yay, we're on the map. If you are ever in St. Paul and you want to take what's pretty cool, it's called the Cave Alcohol Tour. It's not what you think. Yeah. Because during Prohibition, they had these secret bars. They were called speakeasies. And you had to know the password to get into the bar during Prohibition. And one of them was in St. Paul. It was a cave. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry? That's it. The Wabasha Street Caves. You got it. Yep.
Isn't there one in like in Stillwater?
There's one in Stillwater.
By the Oasis?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if that has anything to do. I'm going to give you a 3-minute break. You've been at this for a while. Take a break. When the big hand is on the 3, we'll go over what is on your plate. See you in 2 minutes. No, I'm not messing with it.
Somebody wrote the Wabasha Street Caves is a prom venue.
Yeah.
On the document.
Yeah, it is a problem.
No, yeah.
It's cool. I mean, it was this cave and the beautiful tables and everything.
I told her. Addison Beasley.
Bye. I would make sure that you understand these whole things. Overwhelmed.
Yeah. Stars right now. Kids, right?
You don't know. Me too. I'm gonna need new notebooks soon, Potter.
Are we working on something? Or are we
Do you
just
hear
talking?
that? Yay.
I'm gonna chat about all this
Yeah.
stuff.
How much
and
I have
then
left?
with whatever time's left.
Hi.
It's just,
Got this much left.
can I go to multimedia productions? Jeez.
Oh shoot! Yeah, we have a cheat sheet I gotta fill out. I'm gonna write a whole blue book.
2 hours and 19 minutes.
When we finally become a one-to-one school where every kid's guaranteed a device that's online, there will be no more snow days.
Because
It'll be online learning days.
That is the one drawback. We have to guarantee access.
you can't do that.
So like every kid will be given an iPad. Are you stressed? You're stressed because of this class? Well, I hope.
We can have no school, but we can have
I don't know
online.
if this is going to ease your stress or make it more.
Probably gonna make it worse.
I'm not giving you anything new. I'm just kind of clarifying what
It looks like a lot.
what should be on your.
Wait, do we have to write another paper by next Wednesday? Because that's gonna be the death of me. We're taking no,
That's the day we take our ACT.
and that's the day before my birthday. I don't want to do that.
Paper.
We take our ACT on that day. You won't even know.
Okay, here we go. Give me a couple more minutes here. This is simply a summary of what's on your plate as far as this class is concerned. I understand that some of you are a little bit stressed. One of the interesting things about teaching a class like this is that it's sort of refreshing because I also teach other classes and those kids aren't stressed at all. So allow yourself to be patted on the back about the stress you might feel. What it means is that you are concerned about your successful endeavors, right? That's a good thing. Okay, so I'm trying to pat you on the back, like I'm glad you're. I'm not saying I'm glad you're stressed. That's not right. I'm glad you're invested in your success. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so there's really 3 things going on. One is everything third quarter paper, which is about the Spanish-American War. That is from here to there. And then you've got your Kias. Some of you should start doing those, by the way. And then you've got your Blue Book essay. So let's talk about the paper itself first. By this Wednesday, you should have looked at a close reading of one of those little documents and answer these questions, right? Can you figure out, does your article say, yep, the U.S. was justified or the U.S. should not have gotten involved? Yes or no, right? Who's the one making the argument? Who is that person? Remember when I did the document analysis, it was Josiah Strong. He was a minister. He argued in favor of the Spanish-American War. And his argument was that the U.S. was a white nation. And what we needed to do is spread our seed to all parts of the earth in an effort to do what Hitler ended up doing, right? To make the white man the dominant population. That's what his argument was. What I then need to do is find some sort of evidence.
That was
to
cultural,
support
right?
for Wednesday. By next Wednesday, now I am talking right now to a population of almost all juniors. So I fully acknowledge that next Wednesday, you have this thing called the ACT. And that's what you're going to be focused on that day. We won't even be having class that Wednesday. Allow me to relieve you of a little bit of stress. This paper, which is due on Google Classroom, I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to read it. But still, it's sort of a gauge. And basically, the 4 paragraphs are going to be 2 paragraphs arguing the arguments for why the U.S. was justified and 2 arguments for why the U.S. was not justified with no refutation necessary. Just present the arguments of those who said the U.S. should get involved. Just present the arguments being made and present 2 arguments for the side that says, no, the U.S. should not have got involved. No rejection necessary. It's just a summary of their points of view so that by the end of the day, next Wednesday, you will have summarized the arguments of 2 historians, Hofstadter and Lefebvre. Hofstadter arguing that the U.S. got involved for economic reasons and imperial reasons, and Lefebvre arguing that it was all about economics.
What if you have a 3-paragraph one?
Same thing. You can present the arguments being made by those 2 historians. Okay. And this, which was 4 paragraphs, the arguments not of historians, but of the people at the time. You understand the difference? Part 1 was the view of historians who now are looking back and saying, the arguments they came up with. Part 2 is you going back to the time and saying, here were the arguments that they came up with. Not historians, McKinley, or other people. The people at the time. What did they say? And were they right or wrong? Okay? That will lead to the writing of your final paper, which is the only thing I'm grading.
So,
only thing I'm grading is this.
is it going to be a 10-paragraph paper?
If you want to relieve yourself of some stress, just be ready to talk about your document Wednesday. After Wednesday, you will be well armed because we'll have gone over all 7 documents. You will be well armed to say, I like those 2 arguments for why people said we were justified. I like those 2 arguments for why the U.S. wasn't justified. Jam out a 4-paragraph good faith attempt at a paper.
So it's a 10-paragraph paper
So
altogether?
do we input our own opinion on the 4-paragraph at all?
No.
Okay.
No need for your own opinion. There's no need for analysis. Here are the arguments.
How many paragraphs does the paper end up being?
So wait,
Don't stress yourself.
I'm just
It's gonna be 10, isn't it?
Okay.
when you say there's no analysis with our.
Correct. You do analyze what they meant. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And then you've got your blue book essay. All right. So 3rd gear.
But that's sooner than the paper.
First gear, Kia 2nd gear, 3rd gear. And that is which blue book essay are you going to attempt to answer? First one was, how did the U.S. become an economic giant? And there are these economic arguments, pro-government, pro-business government policies. We went over some today. The economic model called the monopoly, low wages, immigration, all those arguments that we already went up with. 5-paragraph essay. I really think it's easier than you think.
It sounds weird.
Right? There's no refuting. There's no refuting. Here's the first reason why the U.S. became an economic giant. Here's the 2nd reason. Here's the 3rd reason. Document evidence for each, historical evidence for each, analysis for each. Or the nativists. Why were the nativists against unrestricted immigration? 3 reasons why they were against unrestricted immigration. Document evidence for each, historical evidence for each, your analysis. Okay. The one thing you have to do a bit of independent, you need historical evidence to support all of them, but you need a synthesis quote. A synthesis quote. Another, for your blue book essay. We're in blue book essay. Here we are, blue book essay. One synthesis quote. Find a time before or after, right around the year 1900, well before, well after, when, if you're doing the 2nd blue book essay, immigration was a concern. Or if you're doing the 1st blue book essay, government involvement in the economy. Or some sort of economic thing. Okay? You actually print that bad boy out.
And we can use that on the test along with our cheat sheet.
An unmarked copy of your article and your cheat sheet, which by the way is right here. Cheat sheet. It's always there.
And we're allowed to write notes on it, or just
Whatever you want. What's up?
When is the essay and PS
2 weeks.
When is that?
2 weeks.
End of February, beginning of March,
2
right?
weeks.
Yeah.
It's like it's not this week and it's not next week, but it's the week after, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Like February 28th through March 1st.
That's right. February.
27.
Are you
That's
gonna
only
give-
that's only 2 days. 27th, 28th, March 1st.
Are you gonna give us like another outline for the work essay?
Do you want that?
A different one that's not like
Oh. I can do that.
the spice like. The
Yeah, I can do that. I'll make one up for you. Okay.
I think next year.
All right. You can shut off for
Yeah,
6
a
minutes.
spice outline for them.
Okay.
Potter, if I were to like actually do this class, like I didn't take it now and I was gonna do it, but $1,000.
Why would you take it again?
No, I said if I